Her daughter sneered. You should be grateful to be invited. Joanne smiled, then rewrote the guest list, starting with her will. By Friday, Melanie was locked out of the trust, the house, and every future cent. No warning, no fight, just clean paperwork and a notarized goodbye. They toasted family legacy over brunch. Joanne gave hers to someone who'd actually earned it. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The morning was already hot enough to make the pavement glisten when Joanne pulled into the curved driveway of Melanie's brick colonial. She sat for a moment with the engine off, both hands resting on the steering wheel, letting the air settle. The scent of lavender from the handmade centerpieces beside her filled the car 12 small jars, carefully tied with raffia, each filled with blooms from her own garden. She'd arranged them herself last night, wrists aching by the end of it, but satisfied. She reached for the tray, balanced it on one arm, and walked toward the house. The driveway was crowded newer model SUVs, a Tesla she didn't recognize, someone's golf cart parked awkwardly near the mailbox. Voices filtered out from the backyard, laughter and music, the clink of glasses. Joanne stepped carefully between the cars, heels crunching on the gravel edging. As she rounded the corner toward the side gate, Melanie appeared on the porch in a satin dress too bright for morning, phone in one hand, mimosa in the other. Her face twisted into something between amusement and exhaustion. Oh, Mom, you actually brought those? Joanne stopped mid-step. Melanie didn't wait for a reply. I mean, they're sweet, I guess, but this isn't a church bake sale. You should just be grateful to be invited. The words didn't echo, but they landed heavy, deliberate. Joanne blinked once. Her grip tightened around the tray just enough to make one of the jars tilt. From behind Melanie, Connor leaned against the railing with a plastic smile. He didn't say a word, but his eyebrows lifted with the smugness of someone who considered himself above scenes like this. A shadow shifted from the driveway's edge. Ella, 17, quietly radiant in a pale yellow dress, had stopped walking. Her phone was in one hand, a wrapped gift in the other. She'd heard it. Joanne could tell by the way her eyes widened, just slightly, then narrowed, flicking toward her mother like she wanted to speak but didn't know where to begin. Joanne didn't move. The tray of flowers, once hopeful, now felt ridiculous in her hands, like some relic from a life that no longer belonged to her. She stepped forward anyway, bypassing Melanie, her smile faint but steady. In the dining room, laughter swelled. Guests moved between the patio and buffet table with the ease of people who felt entitled to celebration. No one paused to greet her. One woman Joanne didn't recognize glanced at the flowers, offered a polite, "Oh, cute," and walked on. Joanne placed the tray on the entry table, not the main one, just the one near the coat closet, and adjusted one crooked jar. Then, without a word, she turned and walked through the side door leading to the backyard and out the small gate behind the fence. She didn't look back. The sun was sharper now. She walked slowly to her car, not because she was tired, but because moving too fast would feel like retreat. She drove home with the windows down, letting the wind dry whatever emotion had tried to pool behind her eyes. That evening, the sky turned soft with late Kentucky gold. Joanne stood in her backyard, hose in hand, watering the soil with a rhythm older than grief. Her peonies were in second bloom. The tomatoes had finally taken root. She moved row by row, letting the water soak into the base of each plant, careful not to hit the leaves. The gate creaked open. Sandy stepped through, wearing her usual denim capri pants and a Talk Dirt to Me t-shirt, carrying a Tupperware wrapped in foil. "Didn't see you at the brunch," she said, setting the container on a patio chair. Joanne didn't stop watering. "I saw enough." Sandy followed her gaze down the row of marigolds. "Let me guess. Another day of being tolerated like a chore?" Joanne let the water fall a little longer, then shut it off. "No," she said, twisting the hose tight. "Today felt like the day I woke up." Sandy looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Good. Then maybe it's time to stop planting where nothing grows." Joanne looked at the darkened soil under her hands, rich, steady, ready. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away. Joanne waited until morning. Light fell clean across the dining table, soft but certain, the kind that didn't ask permission. She sat with a fresh cup of tea and a pair of reading glasses she hadn't worn since tax season. The table was cleared of everything but one item, a charcoal gray accordion folder, tucked neatly under a dish towel in the back of the hutch. She hadn't touched it in years. She slid the folder toward her hands steady but her heart knocking once inside her chest. The latch gave a dry snap as she unfastened it. Inside, 23 neatly labeled tabs. IRA statements, house deed, living trust, final instructions. The paper was crisp, the ink still sharp from that spring 5 years ago when she and Peter had first sat down to formalize the inevitable, as he'd called it. She flipped to the tab labeled Estate Plan, Current. There it was. Melanie Bell, 25%. Connor Bell, 25%. Ella Bell, 40%. Remaining 10% to Lexington Literacy Fund. She looked at Melanie's name first, then Connor's, toes. There had been a time she could admit this now when she'd wanted them to feel secure. Not because they earned it, but because she'd hoped security might soften them, help them show up with more kindness. She now saw that all it had done was sharpen their expectation. She reached for a pen. Beside Melanie's name, she wrote in clean block letters, entitlement noted. Beneath Connor's, behavior dismissive, observing, not helping. She clicked the pen shut. The morning was quiet, except for the hum of the fridge. Then her phone buzzed. Ella, you okay? Joanne woke up clearer than ever. She set the phone down and turned toward her printer. Dust flecked the top. She hadn't used it since mailing last year's taxes. Still, the light flickered on when she touched the button. She loaded 3 sheets of cardstock into the tray. Click. Whir. Print. Out came 3 photos. One of the house in morning light, freshly mulched and blooming. One of the deed, the red-stamped copy, Pennsylvania ID in full across the bottom. And the last, the original will draft, dated, and signed, with its hopeful, now obsolete list of beneficiaries. She placed them neatly into a manila envelope and slid it under the folder's elastic band. Just then, the side door opened with a squeak she'd been meaning to oil. Sandy stepped in holding a glass pie dish wrapped in a faded dish towel, her voice already mid-thought. Figured if we're doing big thoughts, we ought to have pie to keep them company. Joanne raised an eyebrow. You always bring something sweet when you know something's about to taste bitter. Sandy shrugged, setting the dish down. Well, I know your tells. You shut your blinds, sweep the porch, and pretend the hutch isn't full of decisions. Joanne tapped the folder. It's not pretending anymore. Sandy looked at the photos beside it. Her mouth twitched. Whatever you're cooking, she said softly, make sure you add some closure. That flavor lasts longer. They stood in silence for a beat, the kind you only share with someone who's already seen you at your ugliest and still shows up with dessert. Joanne finally said, Peter's coming by tomorrow. Sandy nodded once. Good. He's precise. I like that in a man who touches documents that outlive us. Joanne laughed gently, a sound more like an exhale than amusement. As Sandy left, the door shut behind her with a quiet click. Joanne picked up the folder again. She didn't close it. Instead, she laid it open on the table pages splayed, intentions now visible, and sat back, letting the morning light finish its sweep across her legacy. She didn't feel sentimental. She felt accurate. Joanne was in the middle of folding clean dish towels when the phone buzzed. Not a call, just a sharp little ding from her messages. It was already dusk, and the house had that quiet weight to it, the kind that settles when you haven't spoken out loud for hours and don't feel the need to. The message was from a number she didn't recognize at first glance. Hi, Joanne. This is Gina, Melanie's planner. Just confirming your attendance for tomorrow's scholarship dinner. 6:30 p.m. Semi-formal. Let me know if you have dietary restrictions. Joanne stared at the screen. Tomorrow? She checked the date, the calendar on the fridge, the wall clock above the pantry, all of them, as if the appliances had suddenly joined in on the joke. She scrolled up. No prior message, no prior heads up, no mention from Melanie, no call, not even a courtesy forward. She typed back slowly. Thanks for the heads up. I'll be there. No restrictions. She didn't ask why the invitation came late. She already knew. By the time she arrived the next evening, the driveway was full and the music had already started soft jazz spilling out from hidden speakers under the porch awning. The backyard had been transformed into a carefully lit space of white tablecloths, folded napkins, and string lights so evenly spaced they could have been measured with a ruler. Joanne stepped through the side gate with the small gift bag she'd brought for Ella, a leather journal, monogrammed, and a fountain pen tucked inside. A young woman, in all-black clipboard in hand, earpiece snug, smiled at her too brightly. "Mrs. Bell, so glad you made it." It was Gina. Her handshake was warm, practiced. "I'm sorry for the late notice," Gina said in a whisper just loud enough to be intimate. "There was some miscommunication with the guest list." Joanne nodded once. Of course there was. She followed Gina to the long banquet table, where place cards had been neatly arranged in a minimalist font all except hers. Where others had printed names, hers had been added in what looked like a half-erased pencil, faint enough to suggest correction. Joanne took her seat without comment. Connor passed by moments later, holding a tumbler of something expensive and amber-colored. "Well, look who made it. Try not to make things awkward by being early next time, yeah?" He grinned like it was a joke, like that would soften the edges. Joanne didn't look up. "Timing's never been your strength, Connor." He kept walking. Dinner was served in courses, arugula and pear salad, seared chicken over risotto, a tiny ramekin of creme brulee with a shard of burnt sugar standing upright like a flag. The food was good, but Joanne barely tasted it. Her attention kept drifting to Ella. The girl was radiant, but not polished. She laughed too loudly at her friends' jokes, forgot to fix her hair before photos, hugged each teacher who came with a reverence that didn't feel performative. She found Joanne across the table mid-meal and rushed over, arms wrapping tight. "I'm so glad you're here," Ella whispered. That was the only moment Joanne smiled that night. When the crowd thinned and chairs scraped gently across the patio pavers, Joanne stood and made her way to the gift table. She tucked her bag among the others, big boxes with ribbons, gift cards in crisp white envelopes, and turned without waiting for anyone to notice. She didn't say goodbye to Melanie, didn't acknowledge Connor. Back home, she set her purse on the kitchen table and walked to her desk. The manila spreadsheet she'd started a week ago was still open. Each name had a column: presence, consistency, gratitude. She found Melanie's row. There was a dash beside each column. She lifted her pen and drew a clean, final line through the entire entry. Then she opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a second sheet newer, empty. She wrote one name at the top: Ella. She sat with the sound of her own breath for a while, then reached for the folder. Tomorrow, Peter would see what needed to be rewritten. The conference room in Peter Wallace's office hadn't changed in years. Same hunter green carpet, same oak chairs that creaked faintly when leaned into, same framed certificate of appreciation from the Kentucky Bar Association on the far wall. Joanne liked the sameness. It made everything feel deliberate. Peter adjusted his reading glasses and slid a packet across the table. "Here's the updated POA," he said. "I've removed Connor as your financial and medical proxy, per your request. Ella's listed as medical proxy, only no access to funds unless you're incapacitated, and 2 doctors sign off. Just how you wanted." Joanne nodded, unscrewing the pen cap with a decisive flick. "Let's keep the authority tied to behavior, not biology." Peter smiled, dry but approving. "I've always admired your clarity." She signed her name cleanly, no pause. "Now, about the trust," he continued. "It's revocable, so any changes you want, percentages, beneficiaries, timing, all adjustable. But once we formalize disinheritance, we'll need a witness for the notice. That makes it harder to challenge later." Joanne reached into her purse and pulled out a typed page she'd drafted the night before. The title at the top was in bold: Preliminary Disinheritance Notice. Peter scanned the contents silently. "I didn't write it in anger," she said, "but I wrote it precisely." He looked up, eyes steady. "That's the kind that holds in court." Joanne slid it forward. "I want this attached to the trust record." He took the paper and set it atop the others. After an hour of clarifications, initials, and updates, Joanne gathered her copy of the documents and placed them into a new folder, no longer the charcoal gray one from home. This one was a crisp navy blue with a brass button, the kind you don't just stash in drawers. Peter walked her to the door. "If you need a notary for the final documents, I've got one in-house. Just say when." Joanne offered a rare, firm smile. "Soon. We're closer than they think." Back home, Sandy was already on the porch, wearing a sun visor and eating cherries from a plastic colander. "That the new gospel?" she asked, eyeing the folder. "Chapters shaping up," Joanne replied. Inside, they cleared the kitchen table and laid out the paperwork. Sandy moved with a kind of blunt grace. No fuss, no commentary. She opened Joanne's laptop, cleared the browser tabs, and began scanning the documents one by one into a clean, password-protected cloud folder. She named it Legacy Revision. Joanne watched each page disappear under the scanner light Connor's removal, Ella's listing, the signed notice. No noise, no drama. Just the quiet efficiency of a woman rewriting her story on purpose. Sandy paused to stretch her wrists. You ever wonder if they'll realize what they lost? Joanne shrugged. If they do, it'll be too late to turn it into a performance. Later that evening, her phone buzzed with a notification. Facebook. Melanie had posted again. It was one of those passive-aggressive reels in pastel colors, captioned with, "Helping our elders understand digital safety is so important, even if they resist." The music was cheery, ironic. The likes were piling up. Joanne didn't comment, didn't call, didn't even open the video. She opened her banking app instead, scrolled to the Trusted Contacts section, tapped Remove beside Melanie's name. A confirmation box popped up. Are you sure you want to remove this contact? She pressed yes and waited until the screen refreshed. Gone. She took a long sip of tea, then clicked the screen off. Some papers you share. Some, you wait for them to notice they never got. The envelope was linen textured, thick and cream-colored, with gold-embossed lettering across the front that read, Legacy Weekend, Asheville, North Carolina. Inside, a tri-fold invitation, floral and overdesigned, detailed an estate planning retreat complete with expert-led workshops, generational wealth panels, and catered networking brunches. At the bottom, in calligraphy font, it read, Hosted with Love by Melanie and Connor Bell. Joanne stared at it for a moment longer than she needed to. Then she slid it under the leg of her kitchen table to stop the wobble. She picked up her phone and called Peter. Let's do it, she said. You're sure? He asked. Not out of doubt, just the decency of final confirmation. Very. That afternoon, she drove to his office again. The sun was relentless, but her mind was cool, focused. In the same oak-paneled room as before, she reviewed the amendment Peter had prepared. Melanie and Connor's names had been struck through with a clean, sanctioned line. Ella's remained intact, and beside it, a new note. Contingency Trustees, Lexington Children's Literacy Fund. Joanne signed the line without hesitation. Peter stamped it. Notarized. Filed. This version, he said, is final unless challenged. And frankly, they don't have a leg to stand on. Joanne smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Then, let's make sure the legs stay cut off. She left with a slim packet of duplicates tucked into her leather bag, not thick with emotion, just weighty with precision. That weekend, Melanie posted a carousel on Instagram. Smiling couples holding wine glasses, a banner that read, Building Generational Wealth, One Signature at a Time, and a final photo of Connor laughing beside a flip chart labeled Trust Strategy. Ella was in the background of one of the shots, seated stiffly, her face turned just enough to avoid the camera. Joanne zoomed in. Her granddaughter's eyes weren't smiling. Later that evening, as Joanne brought in her garden gloves from the porch, Ella's text came through. She said to just smile that you'd be gone before the ink dries. Joanne didn't reply. She walked to her study instead. In the corner stood 3 moving boxes marked with painter's tape. Heirlooms, jewelry, private letters. She opened the first and pulled out a carved wooden box her husband had made in the early 80s cherry wood. Dovetail corners. Inside, a velvet pouch containing the sapphire ring that had belonged to her mother. She took it and the accompanying appraisal certificate, placed them in a padded envelope, and labeled it with a simple, neat Ella. She continued through the evening, marking and sorting each item as if cataloging history, not just things, but stories that deserved more than proximity. By midnight, 3 labeled crates were loaded into her trunk. The following morning, Sandy met her outside the rented storage unit just off the bypass. I brought coffee and the new garage code, she said, holding up a thermos and a Post-it. Swapped it out yesterday. If Melanie has the old one, it's now just a number she can yell at. Joanne chuckled as she lifted the storage bay door. The unit was clean, climate-controlled, and smelled faintly of cedar. She arranged the crates on a low shelf, checking each label again before locking the unit and tucking the key into a zippered pocket in her purse. Back home, She sat at the dining table with a single sheet of paper and her favorite fountain pen. In looping cursive, she wrote out a statement of asset reassignment notarized hours later at the UPS store downtown. She mailed it to herself, sealed and time-stamped, then tucked the envelope into her estate folder under the tab labeled Affidavit, Final. That night, Melanie called. Joanne didn't answer. The next morning, the voicemail transcribed automatically. "Mom, can we talk? I just tried to log into the account and, well, I think there's been a mistake." Joanne read it once, then she pressed delete. The invitation came via group text bright balloons, clapping emojis, and an overly cheerful note from Melanie. "Excited to unveil our new family legacy wall this Sunday. Come for the photos, stay for the mimosa bar, number Generational Love." Joanne didn't reply, but she went. Not to be seen, to see. The house was dressed like a catalog spread fresh peonies on the kitchen island, brunch laid out with place cards and linen napkins, ambient music humming from discreet ceiling speakers. Joanne arrived 15 minutes late on purpose. She'd learned not to be early for things she was only nominally invited to. In the front foyer, Melanie stood poised beside a covered wall-tall canvas draped in champagne fabric, gathered with a gold bow. She held a cordless mic like it was a TED Talk and beamed as the room hushed. "We wanted something to honor where we came from," she said, glancing briefly toward Connor. "To remind Ella what legacy means, and to set a tone for the future." She tugged the bow. The fabric dropped. Behind it, a grid of framed photographs came into view blown-up prints in soft sepia tones. One black and white wedding photo, a few baby pictures of Ella, several shots of Melanie with her father, her in-laws, even candid group photos from holidays. Joanne stepped closer, slowly, as if studying an artifact behind museum glass. She recognized the Thanksgiving photo from 2015, but in this version, her figure had been cropped to the edge of the frame, just a sliver of her cardigan sleeve still visible. In another, her face had been blurred slightly in the background, caught mid-laugh but unfocused, almost ghost-like. It was her history, but barely her presence. "Feels curated," Sandy muttered beside her, clutching a half-empty flute of orange juice. Before Joanne could respond, Connor appeared, his voice light and unbothered. "Nice to see everyone here. We've really poured a lot into this place. Feels good to finally call it ours." Joanne turned to him, smile pleasant and unmistakably direct. "It's mine, until further notice." He blinked. Sandy snorted into her drink. They didn't stay for the mimosa bar. Joanne excused herself after making eye contact with Ella across the room. A brief nod passed between them, quiet agreement, not confusion. Later that evening, after the sun had dipped behind the oak trees lining her backyard, Ella showed up in denim cutoffs and an oversized hoodie. She said nothing as she stepped inside, just handed Joanne a small silver USB drive. "I found this in Dad's old desktop," she said. "You used to record our reading lessons, remember?" Joanne took the drive slowly, feeling its small weight. "I remember. I saved everything, in case someone ever needed the real version." Joanne kissed her granddaughter's forehead without a word. After Ella left, Joanne poured herself a small glass of white wine and went to the sunroom, the one room Melanie never wanted to repaint, redecorate, or elevate. It still smelled faintly of old books and lavender oil, and the light came in at a perfect slant during golden hour. She opened a side cabinet. Inside were the unframed originals, black and white snapshots of her and her late husband building the porch, a photo of newborn Ella asleep on her shoulder, one of Sandy sunburned and laughing beside a deflated kiddie pool. Joanne laid them on the floor, arranging, sorting, remembering. The next day, she picked up a dozen wood frames from a discount bin at the craft store. Nothing matched. That was the point. She hung the first few by the window, slightly off-center, slightly uneven, but fully present. Sandy arrived halfway through the process with 2 paint hooks and a slice of pecan pie on a napkin. She glanced at the wall, then at Joanne. "That's how you write the version that lasts." Joanne smiled as she hammered the next nail into place. The appraiser arrived on a Tuesday morning, early and soft-spoken, with a clipboard in one hand and a digital measuring tool in the other. His khakis were neatly pressed, but his shoes carried dust from 3 other homes already walked that morning. Joanne opened the door without ceremony. gesturing him inside with the kind of quiet that didn't need to impress anyone. "This way," she said, leading him through the front hall. He moved room to room with methodical precision, pausing occasionally to nod at original crown molding, hand-built cabinetry, and the vintage sunroom that caught morning light like it was designed to hold warmth. Joanne didn't hover. She let him do his job. The silence between them was not awkward, it was earned. When he reached the back porch, he lingered. "You said this was built in 2008, he asked, scanning the beams. "My husband and I poured the footers ourselves," she said. "Hired out the roof, but the bones are ours." He smiled, respectful. "It's held up beautifully." By noon, he handed her a printed estimate folded in thirds. She didn't unfold it until he drove away. Estimated market value, $674. 000. 12 years ago, it had appraised at $368,000. The math didn't lie. She sat at the kitchen table, calculator in hand, phone already dialing Peter. "That's enough," she told him, once the numbers were spoken aloud. "More than enough," agreed, he replied. "You still want to do this incrementally? Not all at once?" "Yes," she said. No headlines, just quiet shifts. Peter confirmed they'd draft a plan early disbursements to Ella that wouldn't trigger tax scrutiny, with clear records and receipts. That Friday, Melanie hosted another brunch. This one had a harvest glam theme, and a hired photographer who Melanie tagged in 3 stories and 7 photos before noon. Joanne wasn't invited. Again, but Ella came by around 6, in jeans and a hoodie that still smelled faintly of cinnamon and wood smoke. She held a Tupperware container like it was a peace offering. "Stuffed acorn squash," she said. "You weren't there, so I figured." Joanne took it gently. "You left early." Ella nodded, slipping off her shoes. Didn't feel like staying. They ate at the table with the porch light casting soft shadows across their plates. No small talk, no apologies. Just the kind of dinner that didn't need to justify itself. After Ella left, Joanne walked to her desk and opened the drawer where she kept her handwritten will still marked with sticky notes and penciled-in observations. She picked up her pen. Next to Melanie's name, she wrote, "Repeated exclusion. Pattern consistent." Next to Ella's, "Present. Without performative obligation." At the top of the page, she scrawled something bolder than usual. "Legacy is not equal to entitlement." She underlined it twice. Sandy arrived the next morning with her hair in a knot and paint on her forearms, mid-laugh before she even stepped through the door. "You missed a masterpiece yesterday," she said, flopping onto the porch chair. "Melanie rented a champagne wall for a brunch that didn't have real food." Joanne raised an eyebrow. "A wall of what?" "Mini plastic flutes in gold cubbies. Guests pulled them out like party favors. One woman clapped when her name was called for a raffle." Joanne nearly smiled. "What was the prize?" "A consultation with a wealth coach, sponsored by Connor's firm." Sandy leaned forward, her tone softening. "You know, you're not cutting her out." Joanne looked up. "You're freeing yourself," Sandy finished, "from the expectation that she'll wake up one day and suddenly deserve it." That landed. Not like a revelation, but like a truth that had always been there, just waiting for someone to say it out loud. Joanne set the will aside. She didn't need to add anything else tonight. Not when her silence had already begun to speak for her. Joanne sat in the corner office of the credit union, where the walls were pale blue and the pens were chained to the desk. She could have gone to her brokerage's downtown branch, but she preferred this place smaller, quieter. A few old-timers still greeted by name. Across from her, the trust manager, a man barely older than Ella, clicked through the last of the digital paperwork. He didn't question her instructions. Didn't blink when she asked for a private living trust, beneficiary listed as Ella Bell, successor trustee, Ella Bell, backup, Lexington Children's Literacy Fund. The house title would remain in Joanne's name until her death, under a life estate clause, but there would be no probate, no disputes, no ambiguities. Ella's name was already typed. "It's a clean file," the manager said, sliding over a stylus. "Once this is signed, it's live." Joanne signed in one stroke. No hesitation. From across the lobby, Ella sat cross-legged in a plastic chair, flipping through a college orientation packet with a distracted smile. She glanced up just in time to see Joanne stand. Their eyes met. Something warm passed between them, quiet and mutual. Not relief, certainty. The next morning, Melanie called. Joanne didn't answer at first, but the message transcript appeared automatically. This one wasn't passive-aggressive. It was polished, even polite. Hi, Mom. Just wondering if we could talk briefly? We're looking at refinancing the Tahoe and, well, things are tight this quarter. Thought maybe we could borrow against the inheritance, just short term. Nothing crazy. Joanne read the words in silence, then called back. Not out of obligation, out of clarity. Melanie picked up on the second ring. Mom, thank you for... I won't be lending money, Joanne said evenly. You have a husband in finance. There was a beat of silence. Then, a brittle laugh. Okay, wow. That's cold. No, Joanne replied, voice still soft. It's simply no. She ended the call before Melanie could pivot into guilt. 2 hours later, Connor sent a text. Just curious any updates on anticipated distribution timing for the estate. Want to ensure our planning stays aligned. Joanne didn't reply. She didn't even open the message, because at that moment, she was standing beside Ella at the credit union's second-floor desk. They were updating Ella's student account to reflect her scholarship deposits and setting up automatic rent payments for her off-campus apartment. Ella had just picked out a debit card with a sunflower on it and was talking animatedly to the teller about whether she needed overdraft protection. Joanne watched her granddaughter laugh freely, openly, no performance, and thought about the word protection. This was it. Not a vault, not a boundary, but a living legacy placed exactly where it would bloom. Afterward, they stopped at a nearby diner for grilled cheese and milkshakes. Joanne paid in cash and left a $20 tip without fanfare. Ella stretched across the booth, legs tangled in her messenger bag, and said, "You look lighter lately, like you exhaled something heavy." Joanne stirred her iced tea. Maybe I did. That night, Joanne sat on the edge of her bed, opened the trust folder, and tucked a single sticky note inside the front cover. Written in her slanted, neat handwriting. Name transferred. Not out of spite, out of sense. She didn't close the folder. She left it open on the desk as if even the paperwork needed fresh air. Joanne chopped rosemary with slow, steady hands. The kitchen window opened just enough to let in the smell of cut grass and distant grill smoke. A lemon pie was cooling on the stovetop. Sandy's famous cornbread was warming in the oven, and a bouquet of backyard daisies sat in a mason jar by the sink. The table had been extended to its full length, something it hadn't needed in a while. There were 12 chairs set, none of them for Melanie or Connor. Joanne didn't speak the decision aloud. She didn't need to. The absence was intentional and earned. By 6, the house was filling first with neighbors carrying foil-covered casseroles and Tupperware of coleslaw, then with Ella's friends, all in denim and sneakers and hair pulled back from volleyball practice. Laughter spilled through the screen door. Someone started a playlist. Sandy, already wearing an apron that read, "Yes, I cooked," that stood over a skillet of sizzling butter and nodded her approval like a general before a battle. Ella arrived last. She wore a thrifted sundress with fading sunflowers and hugged Joanne so tightly it startled them both. "This is perfect," she whispered. "I didn't think. I figured you'd just do lunch or something." Joanne smiled, brushing a curl behind her ear. Some milestones deserve more than sandwiches. Dinner was served buffet-style chili, cornbread, roasted carrots, a green salad with pomegranate seeds. They sat on folding chairs and porch rockers and talked about dorm room setups, dream majors, and who got waitlisted where. No formal toast, no forced attention. Just Ella's voice, rising and falling naturally, like music Joanne hadn't realized she'd missed. Later, after dishes were stacked in the sink and most guests had drifted to the porch with second cups of coffee or slices of pie, Joanne pulled Ella aside. "I've got something for you," she said, leading her into the sunroom. There, on the old writing desk, sat a small wooden box, no bigger than a jewelry case. Joanne opened it carefully and placed it in Ella's hands. Inside, a single brass house key and a folded document tied with a blue ribbon. Ella's fingers shook slightly. "What is this?" "The key's obvious," Joanne said softly. "The rest is the trust paperwork. You're not just inheriting this house, you're written into it now. Protected." Ella didn't speak right away. Her eyes welled. She clutched the box against her chest and whispered. "You don't have to," Joanne said, pulling her close. I didn't cut her out. She stepped away. That night, long after the house emptied and leftover pie was tucked into the fridge, Joanne scrolled past a new post from Melanie on Facebook. A photo of sunflowers captioned, "Some parents love with open arms. Others keep score." It had 83 likes and one comment. So true. Sending hugs. Joanne didn't react. She simply turned off her phone and walked to the back door. On the stoop, Sandy was wiping her hands on a dish towel, the night breeze tugging at her sleeves. "She posted, didn't she?" Sandy asked without looking up. Joanne nodded. "Mm-hmm. Something about favoritism," Sandy chuckled. If memory serves, she was the only one keeping tally. Joanne sat down beside her, the coolness of the steps seeping into her knees. "I'm tired of defending choices I didn't even get to make. She opted out a long time ago. I'm just catching up." They sat in silence until the porch light blinked on automatically. The next morning, a thick envelope appeared in Joanne's mailbox return address printed in neat, impersonal font. Connor Bell, J.D. Bell Financial Strategies, PLLC. She opened it on the porch, coffee in hand. Inside, a letterhead memo claiming concern over unilateral changes to shared estate interests and requesting a full. Joanne didn't speak the decision aloud. She didn't need to. The absence was intentional and earned. By 6, the house was filling first with neighbors carrying foil-covered casseroles and Tupperware of coleslaw, then with Ella's friends, all in denim and sneakers and hair pulled back from volleyball practice. Laughter spilled through the screen door. Someone started a playlist. Sandy, already wearing an apron that read, "Yes, I cooked," that stood over a skillet of sizzling butter, and nodded her approval like a general before a battle. Ella arrived last. She wore a thrifted sundress with fading sunflowers and hugged Joanne so tightly it startled them both. "This is perfect," she whispered. I figured you'd just do lunch or something." Joanne smiled, brushing a curl behind her ear. Some milestones deserve more than sandwiches. Dinner was served buffet-style chili, cornbread, roasted carrots, a green salad with pomegranate seeds. They sat on folding chairs and porch rockers and talked about dorm room setups, dream majors, and who got waitlisted where. No formal toast, no forced attention. Just Ella's voice, rising and falling naturally, like music Joanne hadn't realized she'd missed. Later, after dishes were stacked in the sink and most guests had drifted to the porch with second cups of coffee or slices of pie, Joanne pulled Ella aside. "I've got something for you," she said, leading her into the sunroom. There, on the old writing desk, sat a small wooden box no bigger than a jewelry case. Joanne opened it carefully and placed it in Ella's hands. Inside, a single brass house key and a folded document tied with a blue ribbon. Ella's fingers shook slightly. "What is this?" "The key's obvious," Joanne said softly. "The rest is the trust paperwork. You're not just inheriting this house. You're written into it now. Protected." Ella didn't speak right away. Her eyes welled. She clutched the box against her chest and whispered, "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to," Joanne said, pulling her close. "I didn't cut her out." She stepped away. That night, long after the house emptied and leftover pie was tucked into the fridge, Joanne scrolled past a new post from Melanie on Facebook. A photo of sunflowers, captioned, "Some parents love with open arms. Others keep score." It had 83 likes and one comment. So true. Sending hugs. Joanne didn't react. She simply turned off her phone and walked to the back door. On the stoop, Sandy was wiping her hands on a dish towel, the night breeze tugging at her sleeves. "She posted, didn't she?" Sandy asked without looking up. Joanne nodded. "Mm-hmm. Something about favoritism." Sandy chuckled. If memory serves, she was the only one keeping tally. Joanne sat down beside her, the coolness of the steps seeping into her knees. "I'm tired of defending choices I didn't even get to make. She opted out a long time ago. I'm just catching up." They sat in silence until the porch light blinked on automatically. The next morning, a thick envelope appeared in Joanne's mailbox return address printed in neat, impersonal font. Connor Bell, J.D. Bell Financial Strategies, PLLC. She opened it on the porch, coffee in hand. Inside, a letterhead memo claiming concern over unilateral changes to shared estate interests and requesting a full account of recent asset realignment. A veiled threat, polished language wrapped around desperation. Joanne smiled faintly, folded the letter once, and tapped it against the arm of her chair. She didn't call Peter immediately. She sent a photo of the letter to Ella instead. The caption read, "This is what it looks like when entitlement realizes it was never equity." Joanne sat across from Peter in his office again, the familiar tick of the grandfather clock nudging time forward behind them. The legal pad in front of him was half-filled, his fountain pen capped and resting near the edge. He leaned back, reading glasses perched low on his nose, and said in his usual even tone, "They can't contest what was never promised." Joanne exhaled slowly. "And if they try?" Peter smiled the kind only lawyers with airtight documents can offer. "Let them burn retainer fees chasing a door that was never open." She nodded, folded her hands in her lap, and let herself sit still in the knowledge. For the first time in weeks, the room felt cooler than her own thoughts. By the time she returned home, Melanie had already tried to call 3 times. Joanne didn't answer. The 4th time, the message transcript lit up on her phone without her needing to open it. "Mom, this is ridiculous. You took it too far. That brunch was supposed to be lighthearted. We were joking. You're seriously overreacting. Please call me." Joanne didn't call. She typed a single message back and hit send. "I didn't remove you out of anger. I removed you out of awareness." Then she turned the phone face down on the table. An hour later, Ella texted. She tried calling. "Me too." I blocked her. "Just for a while. I needed space to breathe." Joanne didn't ask for details. She didn't need them. That afternoon, she and Sandy pulled the old crates from the attic brittle file folders. Albums with yellowed edges, boxes marked 1989, and Dad's letters. They set up shop at the dining table, where a borrowed scanner hummed to life with every pressed button. "Ella wants the full story someday," Joanne said, adjusting a photo of her late husband in a Cub Scout uniform. "Not the airbrushed version, not what Melanie stages for Instagram." Sandy chuckled. "The unfiltered truth. Lord help her, she's getting it in TIFF files." The work was slow, meditative. Sandy read captions out loud as she scanned, while Joanne sorted piles into timelines. Each image, each scribbled note, each newspaper clipping it all belonged somewhere. And now, finally, it would have a home. When they finished for the day, Sandy stood and stretched. "You keep this up," she said, "and you're going to have the most dangerous weapon a woman your age can wield." Joanne looked up. "Which is?" "Documentation." That night, long after the scanner was shut down and Sandy had gone home, Joanne stepped out onto the porch barefoot. The July air was thick, and the crickets were loud enough to hum under her skin. She hadn't walked the property without shoes since before her husband died. Now she did. The grass was warm from the day's sun, soft underfoot. She moved slowly past the garden, down toward the tool shed he'd built, over the stone path they'd argued about for weeks, until finally laying it together one weekend after a rainstorm. Her breath slowed as her steps became less careful, more certain. By the time she reached the back fence, her soles were dusty, but she felt unburdened, whole. When she came back inside, her phone buzzed again. A new voicemail. No transcript this time. Melanie had disabled that setting. Joanne played it on speaker, letting the quiet house bear witness. "Mom, it's me. Again. Look, we'll get lawyers involved if we have to, okay? You're not thinking straight. This is all happening too fast. Call me back." Joanne didn't. Instead, she clicked the phone off, reached for the envelope that held Ella's memoir folder, and added one more sticky note on top. "Start here." Not with what they said, but with what they tried to take back. The bank lobby smelled faintly of citrus-scented disinfectant and printer toner. The kind of sterile mix Joanne had come to associate with adulthood. Not youth, not inheritance, just the quiet administration of what you earned and protected. She sat across from a young loan officer with a navy tie and nervous eyebrows, Ella at her side, flipping her debit card in slow, nervous circles between her fingers. "This will cover 2 semesters, Joanne said, signing the last form with clean strokes. "Room, board, books, and a little left for emergencies. And I paid the first year's rent directly to the complex." The man nodded. "Everything's cleared and confirmed." Joanne stood, tugging her bag strap higher on her shoulder. "Then we're done here." Outside, The Kentucky heat shimmered off the parking lot pavement. They crossed it together, heading toward a used hybrid Corolla that sat under the only tree. Pale green, with no vanity plates or flashy decals. Practical. Reliable. Ella stopped when she realized Joanne was holding out the keys. Wait, what? Joanne smiled. Insurance is paid through the year. Registration's in your name. Ella blinked, mouth half open. You'll need it for off-campus interviews, Joanne said. And to come home when you want to, not just when you feel guilty. Ella opened her mouth, closed it, then finally said, You're unreal. She threw her arms around Joanne's neck with a suddenness that nearly knocked them both off balance. Later that night, after a pizza dinner on the sunroom floor, half-eaten slices and soda cans littered across a quilt from Joanne's cedar chest, Ella handed her a wrapped gift. Nothing big, just a flat square tied with a scrap of cotton ribbon. Inside, a framed quote in soft blue lettering. Love doesn't look like leverage. Joanne's throat tightened. Where did you find this? I didn't. I wrote it. Ella smiled, eyes bright. I needed to remind myself, too. Joanne placed it on the windowsill beside the photo of her and her husband planting tomatoes in 98 hands, muddy, faces grinning. She didn't cry, but she didn't speak for a long moment either. A few days later, while clipping dead leaves from her marigolds, Sandy strolled up the driveway, sunglasses pushed into her hair, and holding her phone like it had personally offended her. You're gonna want to hear this, she said, flipping the screen around. A social post. Not from Melanie, from one of her friends. A long, fussy comment thread beneath a baby shower photo that featured Melanie in a high-necked floral dress, smiling wide. Someone had commented, Melanie, you always post about your daughter, but never your mom. You two close? The reply was vague. It's complicated. My mom chooses who she wants to show up for. A second reply came from another friend. I heard she bought your daughter a car. Wild. Maybe she's not the cold one. Sandy snorted. The echo chamber's got a draft. Joanne didn't respond, just trimmed another stem and dropped it into the compost bucket. That kind of thing didn't sting anymore. It just proved the point. That evening, tucked among the junk mail, Joanne found a crisp envelope from Ella's university. She opened it, expecting a generic welcome packet. Instead, she unfolded a letter on linen-textured stationery. Dear Miss Bell, on behalf of our administration and financial office, we thank you for your thoughtful early tuition sponsorship. Students like Ella thrive because of personal investments from those who believe in more than performance. Warmly, Director of Student Advancement. Joanne folded the letter back into thirds and tucked it behind the framed quote on her windowsill. She didn't need to display it. She just wanted to know it had existed in writing. The next morning, Peter called. Asset realignment's ready to finalize, he said. I need your signature once more. Then it's all locked. Perfect, Joanne said. Once this is done, he added. There's no reversing it. Not even a little. Joanne glanced at the framed quote again. The sun was just rising, spilling soft gold across the kitchen tile. That's the idea. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday afternoon ivory stock with gold edging, the return address embossed in swirling script, the Bell residence. Joanne turned it over once before slicing it open with the paring knife she'd been using to core tomatoes. She pulled out a trifold card, printed with cursive too ornate to be practical. Please join us for a celebration of legacy, hosted by Melanie and Connor Bell. It listed a venue she'd never been to, a caterer she'd once hired and regretted, and a theme timeless generosity that made her smile for reasons no one in that house would understand. She stared at the RSVP card. Accept or regretfully decline. No, maybe. No, already done enough. Joanne pulled out a sticky note and wrote in small, calm handwriting, already uninvited. She pressed the note inside the return envelope, sealed it, and walked it to the mailbox with the same quiet intention she used to carry casseroles to church. By the time she returned to the house, her phone had buzzed with a text. Ella, look what I made mine. Attached, 4 photos of a dorm room twinkle lights hung unevenly across a bulletin board, a handmade quilt folded at the foot of the bed, a cork map with pushpins already placed in Lexington, Asheville, and a hopeful one in D.C. Above the desk hung the framed quote she'd given Joanne. Love doesn't look like leverage. Joanne smiled and tapped reply. Looks like home to me. That Friday, Sandy hosted a gathering on her porch, not big enough to be called a party, not small enough to feel like nothing. The old string lights were rehung. Someone brought deviled eggs in a cupcake carrier, and a playlist of late 70s classics hummed from a speaker tucked behind a potted fern. Sandy raised a glass midway through the evening. To chosen family, she said. The ones who don't need to be asked twice to show up, or told why they matter. Joanne clinked her glass gently against hers. Around them, neighbors laughed, someone passed a plate of brownies, and a teenager in a vintage tee tried to light sparklers without setting his sleeves on fire. It felt unedited, real. Later that weekend, Joanne opened her laptop on the sunroom table and noticed a strange silence on her social media feed. No more tags, no more filtered family photos. She searched Melanie's profile. Dozens of pictures were gone. Birthday parties, beach trips, graduation brunches, and all the ones with her erased. Sandy called it petty. Joanne called it predictable. She didn't say anything about it. She just opened the drawer that held the deed paperwork for the backyard lot, the garden she and her husband had carved from clay soil one backbreaking summer in 1991. Tomatoes, zinnias, basil that grew like it knew secrets. She'd spent years in that soil. Now it would belong to someone who didn't see it as nostalgia but as foundation. The next day, she walked the file over to Peter's office and signed the transfer papers. One small lot, one big gesture. Ownership moved from Joanne Bell to Ella Bell, effective immediately. That evening, Ella arrived with muddy sneakers and a bronze plaque the size of a paperback book. They stood at the edge of the raised beds as the sun set in ribbons of lavender and peach. "You sure you want it here?" Joanne asked, nodding toward the plaque. Ella grinned. "Only place it makes sense." She dug a shallow square near the stepping stone path and set it in, gently pressing the soil around the base. Joanne knelt beside her, brushing off the dirt from the engraved face. "Rooted here. No signature, no flourish, just truth in brass." Joanne looked up at her granddaughter's skin, freckled, hair wind-mussed, eyes steady. It didn't feel like an end. It felt like the first stake driven into a place that would outlast them both. Joanne chose thick parchment paper cream colored with a slight tooth, the kind that caught ink just enough to make it feel weighty. She lined up the edges, stacked 2 spares nearby, and uncapped her fountain pen. No heading, no date, no opening pleasantries. She began in the middle, because that's where the story lived. "You once told me I should be grateful to be invited. Not to your events, your brunches, your legacy walls, but to your life." Her pen didn't pause. It moved like it had waited too long, to be honest. "So let's make a record." She chronicled the early years when Melanie had leaned hard into appearance, where show mattered more than showing up. She wrote of the scholarship brunch, the penciled seating chart, the photos cropped at shoulder height, the mimicry of inclusion, the erasure dressed as celebration. She named each moment without embellishment. The refinance request, the comments about timing, the silence in Ella's eyes that Melanie had never once noticed. She wrote in full sentences, not accusations. There was no venom, but there was precision. You thought inheritance was inevitable, that love would write itself into your name by default. But love, like legacy, is earned. And you stopped earning mine a long time ago. Her hand trembled only once when she reached the final paragraph. "I didn't disinherit you out of anger. I did it because you already stepped away. I simply stopped leaving the door unlocked behind you." Then, the closing line, "You said I should be grateful to be invited. I uninvited you from the future I built." Joanne signed her name with the same looped elegance she used to write Ella's birthday cards. She didn't reread the letter. She didn't need to. She folded it into thirds, slid it into a linen envelope, and sealed it with a single strip of plain washi tape. On the front, in soft graphite pencil, she wrote, "To be delivered only upon my death, M.B." She tucked the envelope into a small brass lockbox and turned the key until she heard the soft click. Then she slid the box onto the top shelf of the safe beside her will, the trust packet, and the deed. Later that day, Peter called from his office. He didn't sound rushed or distracted, just final. "Everything's filed. Deeds, accounts, trust declarations. No legal pathway left open. No revision requests accepted post-submission." Joanne sat at her kitchen table, hands wrapped around a lukewarm mug of tea. And that means? It means, Peter said, your estate is yours. Not a debate, not an argument, just fact. She didn't smile. She exhaled. 2 hours later, Ella arrived with a grocery tote of produce and a bouquet of wildflowers she claimed were barely stolen from the college's community garden. They made a salad neither of them wanted and ate it anyway while talking about classes, professors, dorm drama, and the odd luxury of grocery store raspberries. When the sun fell and the table was cleared, Joanne reached into the drawer and held up the key to the lockbox. I wrote the letter, she said quietly. Ella didn't ask which one. Joanne set the key down. You wrote it with love, Ella said, rising to embrace her. Not anger. That's what makes it powerful. Joanne pressed her forehead to her granddaughter's temple. No, she whispered. That's what makes it final. Outside, the wind picked up slightly, tugging at the hanging fern on the porch. The night didn't feel heavy. It felt exact. In a house with no open doors left to the past, Joanne had written her final sentence, but it was Ella who would carry the rest of the story. The ballroom wasn't lavish, but it tried white tablecloths with pressed corners, centerpieces of hydrangeas in mismatched glass jars, the faint hum of an air vent trying its best to keep up with a late August afternoon. Joanne stood just inside the doorway, scanning the room. No gold lettering, no scripted hashtags, no Melanie, no Connor. Good. An usher in a black vest approached with a clipboard and a kind face. Miss Bell? Joanne nodded. You're seated here, he said, gesturing to the front row near the podium. Special recognition donors and guests of honorees. She raised an eyebrow but followed. Her chair had a simple white card with her name printed clearly, no pencil, no faint ink, just Joanne Bell, centered and uncorrected. Sandy arrived minutes later, breathless and grinning, her phone already open to camera mode. Smile, she said. This one's going in a frame. Joanne rolled her eyes but smiled anyway, easy one. Not forced, not for show. Sandy snapped the photo just as Ella stepped onto the small stage in a navy blazer that didn't quite fit her shoulders but somehow made her look taller anyway. There was no grand music cue, just polite applause and a ripple of chairs creaking back as guests leaned forward. The dean of students spoke first, reading through a list of scholarship recipients. Then came faculty introductions, sponsors thanked, applause peppered throughout. Finally, the woman at the podium paused. And now, a short recognition of the foundational support behind our rising generation. Please join me in acknowledging Miss Joanne Bell, whose steadfast generosity and private sponsorship has directly shaped not just one student's future, but her present. There was a moment of surprised stillness. Then, warm, full applause. Sandy whooped once, then caught herself, clapping harder to mask it. Joanne stayed seated, but her chin lifted, her back straightened. She didn't wave, she didn't cry, she just let it land. Ella stepped back up, paper in hand. I wasn't planning to say much, she began, but I was told I'd regret it if I didn't at least thank the person who never asked to be thanked. Laughter trickled softly through the audience. She continued, voice steadier now. My grandmother is not someone who talks about legacy. She builds it, quietly, constantly. She's the one who taught me that love doesn't leverage. It lifts. Joanne's breath caught. Ella looked straight at her. She never left me out. Not once. Not even when it would have been easier. There was no dramatic pause, just a nod, and a wave of applause that filled the room like something unbottled and genuine. Afterward, as guests milled about near the refreshment table and Ella disappeared into a flurry of congratulatory hugs, Joanne found herself at the edge of the crowd, near a folding table stacked with printouts of student speeches. One of the coordinators, a young man with bright socks and tired eyes, handed her a stapled copy of Ella's speech. She wanted you to have this, he said. She wrote it last night, handed it in early. Joanne took the pages carefully, folding them once and sliding them into her purse without a word. Outside, the evening light stretched long over the sidewalk. Her car was parked 2 blocks away, beneath a sycamore that shed bark like papery scrolls. She walked slowly, the sounds of the banquet receding behind her, Ella's words echoing in their place. Not once, not even when it would have been easier. At the car, She paused before unlocking the door. The paper rustled in her bag. She pulled it out, unfolded it, and smoothed the creases. One last line at the bottom, scrawled in pen beneath the typed speech. I meant all of it. Joanne stood there a long moment, hand pressed flat against the page. Behind her, the last of the guests spilled onto the sidewalk, but no one called her name, and for once, she didn't need them to. The notebook was soft from use, its leather worn to a gentle sheen, and the pages slightly curled at the corners. Joanne kept it in the drawer with the extra pens and envelopes, tucked beneath the copy of her power of attorney and the deed transfer receipt. She hadn't opened it in a while, but today felt like the right day. The porch was quiet, the late September light drifting in through the screen door like something slow and golden. She set her tea beside her and opened the notebook to the back section, the one labeled, in her own looping cursive, "Final Affairs Confirmed." She ran her finger down the list, checking off each item with a deliberate, satisfying tick of the pen. Will updated, notarized, filed. Trust revised and executed. Property deeds transferred. House contents designated. Garden reassigned. Letter to MB sealed. Educational fund released. Estate council confirmed. Only one item remained. Obituary draft. Joanne stared at the empty box beside it. Then she turned to a fresh page, uncapped her pen, and began to write. Not her resume. Not a list of affiliations or committees. Not what Melanie would have drafted, had she been asked. Just this. Joanne Bell, 78, died after living on her own terms. She loved a good book, quiet mornings, her garden, and the granddaughter who never once asked to be earned. She believed in handwritten thank you notes and in protecting the softest things fiercely. She lived fully and left with intention. She underlined the last sentence once, closed the notebook, tucked it back in the drawer. At 6 o'clock sharp, the front gate creaked, and Ella appeared with a paper sack in one hand and a pint of lemonade slush in the other. "I made stir-fry," she said, stepping onto the porch. "It's half decent. I even Googled how not to ruin tofu." Joanne laughed softly, moving aside to make room on the porch swing. "I'm glad the internet is good for something." They ate side by side, plates balanced on their laps, the evening breeze stirring the wind chimes above them. Across the street, a neighbor's sprinkler hissed to life. Somewhere farther off, a dog barked once, then quieted. Joanne's phone buzzed. On the armrest. Melanie? She didn't even glance at the screen, just pressed the side button and silenced it. Ella noticed but said nothing, just reached over and handed her the last piece of tofu. The porch light clicked on automatically. 10 minutes later, Sandy knocked on the screen door with a grocery store pie balanced in one hand and a grocery bag in the other. "I brought dessert and paper towels," she said. "Because I'm a realist," Joanne chuckled. "We're dangerously low on both." Sandy settled into the wicker chair, kicked off her shoes, and opened the pie box. "It's apple. They were out of peach. I nearly filed a complaint." Ella passed her a plate. "You always say that." "Because one day," Sandy said, mouth full, "I just might." The three of them sat in companionable silence as the last of the sunlight slipped below the horizon. The air smelled like leaves and leftover basil. Moths bounced lazily against the porch bulb. It wasn't loud. It wasn't remarkable. But it was theirs. Joanne glanced toward the garden, its soil darkening under the soft night. The brass plaque still caught a hint of light. Rooted here. She leaned back into the porch swing, one hand resting on Ella's, the other holding a bite of pie she hadn't gotten around to finishing. The phone buzzed again. She didn't move this time. She didn't need to. She looked out over everything she'd kept, everything she'd handed forward, everything she had chosen with care. Then, with the faintest trace of a smile, she spoke not to anyone in particular, just into the air that knew her name. "She said I should be grateful to be invited, but I was the one who built the guest list and chose who stayed.